The funeral hall smelled like peppermint and lies, and my father's photo was nowhere on the altar. I'm Clara, 33, a marketing analyst from Seattle, and I knew something was wrong the moment I saw my childhood picture torn in half in my coat pocket. Ever had your family pretend you don't exist in a room full of people who should have known better? Tell me, what would you have done next? Under the gray December sky of Lancaster. Clara Jennings stepped out of her rental car, buttoning her coat against the bite of the wind. Her heels clicked on the icy brick path as she entered the stately funeral home. The wreaths on the door, the faint hum of organ music, the smell of peppermint and wood smoke. It was all familiar and foreign at once. She paused just inside the chapel's vestibule, her breath catching as her eyes scanned the altar. There, framed in silver, was a family photo, Denise Langford in a crimson dress, Kyle and Brittany flanking her, all smiles. But no Samuel Jennings. No picture of the man Clara had flown across the country to mourn. No sign that he had a daughter. A subtle tension spread through her chest. She glanced around, hoping for a second display, a portrait anything. But aside from a row of framed snapshots tucked near the flowers, none showed her father alone. None featured her mother. The sepia-toned photo Clara had once restored of her parents on their wedding day gone. She adjusted her scarf and walked slowly toward the pews, unsure of where to sit. Denise was already at the front, flanked by her children in sleek black. No one turned as Clara entered. An usher intercepted her with polite efficiency. "Miss, you'll be seated toward the back today. Reserved rows are for immediate family." Clara blinked. "I am immediate family." The usher hesitated. "Ma'am, I was instructed." "It's fine," Clara said softly, retreating to a seat at the back corner. Her voice held no malice, but her knuckles whitened around the program. The service began. Reverend Thomas, a gentle man with a nervous smile, spoke of community of grief and gratitude. He mentioned Samuel's charity work, his love of classic jazz, even his beautiful blended family, but not his first wife, not his daughter. Then Denise stood. Clara watched as her stepmother approached the podium in quiet command. The woman looked flawless, not a hair out of place. Her voice rang clear, calm, curated. Sam was a man of resilience, Denise said. He loved deeply his work, his children, his new traditions. Holidays in Vermont, brunch at Langford's Bistro, our yearly family photos. Clara's throat tightened. His children. As if she weren't here. As if 29 years of birthdays and summer hikes and late-night calls had never happened. She lowered her eyes, focusing on the hymn lyrics printed neatly on the back of the program. Her father's name was there, but not hers. After the final prayer, guests filed toward the reception hall. Clara lingered, hoping for a word with Harold Quimby, her father's longtime attorney. She spotted him near the chapel door, tall and somber in his outdated pinstripe suit. "Mr. Quimby," she called. He turned, offered a curt nod. "Clara, may I ask?" "About the will, I wasn't contacted." Harold's mouth tightened. "Denise is handling those affairs. It's a delicate matter. She said I shouldn't trouble myself. I find that troubling. I'm sure everything was done according to Samuel's wishes." He replied, already turning away. Clara stood frozen, the weight of his dismissal pressing heavy. Just then, Denise passed by, clasping a small coffee in both hands, smiling as if she hadn't just erased Clara from every frame of her father's memory. "You must be tired," she said, voice dipped in honey. "You don't need to attend the reading. It's all been seen to." Clara didn't answer. She walked out into the frigid parking lot alone. At her motel that night, Clara slipped off her coat and reached into the inner pocket to retrieve the small photo she'd tucked there, one she'd once given her father of her 6th grade recital. They'd laughed about her crooked bangs, her oversized violin. She gasped. The photo was torn clean through, right down the middle, her half missing. Clara sat heavily on the edge of the bed. A hollow sound escaped her lips. Whether it was anger or sorrow, she didn't know. The next morning brought more shadows. At the reception hall beside the chapel, guests lingered by the gingerbread tray and urns of coffee. Clara helped an elderly man find his coat, her quiet grace unnoticed by most. She felt like a ghost drifting through rooms she no longer belonged in. When she approached the casket, Denise's brother stepped directly into her path. "Family first," he said, not unkindly, as if stating a rule that couldn't be broken. The casket closed behind him. Clara stood alone once more. She stepped outside, the wind nipping her cheeks. The day had dimmed into a pale, icy dusk. She hugged her coat tighter and walked toward her car. Snowflakes began to fall, slow, hesitant. Then, from behind her, Clara. She turned. There, beneath the chapel's stone archway, stood a figure wrapped in a tartan scarf and long wool coat. A familiar voice, a warm presence from the past. Mildred. Clara said, breath fogging in surprise. Her father's longtime assistant stepped forward, eyes kind, voice steady. "I think we should talk." At 6:30 a.m., Clara was stirred from sleep by a sharp knock on her motel room door. The light outside was thin and gray. She pulled a sweater over her flannel pajamas, slipped on her boots, and padded quietly across the threadbare carpet. Another knock, firm but hesitant. She opened the door slowly. "Mildred," she said, surprised. The older woman stood bundled in a pea coat, tartan scarf, tucked neatly at her neck, cheeks flushed from the cold. In her gloved hands, she held an envelope, cream-colored thick, sealed with a wax insignia Clara didn't recognize. Her hands were trembling. "I didn't sleep," Mildred said. "You should read this somewhere warm." Clara ushered her inside and turned up the heater. Steam rose from the old radiator as they sat at the edge of the bed. Clara examined the envelope. The wax bore an imprint. A lion's head circled in Latin text. Her father's crest from his college ring. With careful fingers she broke the seal. The paper inside was crisp and smelled faintly of cedar. Her father's handwriting, steady, deliberate, stretched across the page in blue ink. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be cautious. I fear what I can no longer prove. I've rewritten my will legally and privately. Mildred knows how to help you. There is a safety deposit box. Inside everything you'll need to protect the truth and our name. They'll tell you not to fight. Fight anyway." Clara stared at the words, the shape of them, the finality. Her father hadn't lost his mind. He'd seen this coming. Mildred placed a hand over hers. "He called me the night before the surgery, made me promise to wait until after the funeral. 'Let them show their cards first,' he said." Clara swallowed. Is it valid?" "It's notarized. Witnessed. He used a third-party legal service separate from Harold." Clara looked out the window. Sleet tapped against the glass like nervous fingers. She exhaled and reached for her coat. "I need coffee," she said. Maple Bell Cafe hadn't changed since the last time she visited Lancaster. The booths were red vinyl cracked at the edges. Holiday garlands stretched lazily across the counter. Old men read newspapers with strong coffee and quiet nods. The air smelled of cinnamon and butter. Grace, the waitress, silver hair and a bun-hoop earrings glinting, looked up as they entered. "Well, I'll be," she said. "That little Jennings girl." She waved them toward a booth. "Sit anywhere, sweetheart. Biscuits just came out." Clara gave a grateful smile and slid into a seat across from Mildred. While they waited, an elderly man in a herringbone coat tipped his cap at Clara. "Morning, Miss Jennings. Your dad was a good man." She managed a smile. "Thank you. That's Mr. Abrams," Mildred whispered. He used to manage the First Keystone branch. When the coffee came, Clara stirred it slowly. Grace returned moments later with warm apple pie. On the house, she said. Sam always tipped well. Clara blinked, caught between grief and gratitude. She reached for her wallet, left $20 under the napkin holder. A quiet strength settled in her chest. She glanced at Mildred. Let's go. First Keystone Bank still had a bell over the door that jingled when they entered. A Christmas tree sat in the corner, sparsely decorated with red bows and tiny lights. The clerk behind the desk, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, stood up immediately. Oh my, she said. Sammy's little shadow. Clara blinked. You remember me? I remember your pigtails and your blueberry-stained sundress. She smiled. He spoke of you often. After checking Clara's ID and a key Mildred produced from a pouch sewn into her purse, the clerk led them to the back vault. Inside box 517 was a stack of documents tied with a green ribbon. Beneath them, a small black USB drive, a bottle of expired prescription pills, and several photos, including one of Clara as a toddler sitting on her father's shoulders. The will was notarized, dated just 6 weeks earlier. Clear as crystal, all assets, properties, and intellectual holdings to Clara Jennings' daughter and sole legal heir. A side clause instructed that should the circumstances of death raise suspicion, the enclosed medical and financial documents be submitted to the state probate office. Mildred inserted the USB into her laptop. A single audio file loaded. She clicked play. Her father's voice filled the silence. Clara, if this finds you know I always saw you. They'll say you weren't around. But you were the one who never asked for anything, who gave without claiming space. I feared what Denise was capable of. If I'm gone, you'll have to be stronger than I was. Protect our family's truth. Clara sat frozen. She had always doubted herself, wondered if maybe she had been distant. But here was proof he'd known. He'd planned for this. She felt her spine straighten. I need a copy of everything, she said. That night, Clara returned to the motel with a folder full of truths. She placed the will in the desk drawer, the USB beside it, and changed into fresh clothes. The window glowed faintly with snow. Outside, the porch railing was thick with white. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. She made tea, sat down. Her phone buzzed. No contact, just a number. The text read, Stay out of this. You don't belong here. At 2:00 p.m. sharp, Clara Jennings opened the frosted glass doors of Langford and James Law Firm. Her coat was buttoned to the collar. A simple bun pulled her hair away from her face. In one gloved hand, she carried a sealed red envelope, edges worn slightly from being opened and resealed as if it had passed through both fire and memory. The receptionist blinked at her arrival, hesitated, then stood. May I help? I'm here for the will reading, Clara said calmly. Before the woman could respond, Denise's voice rang from the hallway beyond. She's not on the list. Clara stepped forward, gaze level. That may be changing. Gregory Harrison, the firm's senior partner, appeared in the doorway just behind Denise. Polished, lean, and bespectacled, he looked every inch the man who'd shepherded family estates for decades. It's fine, Denise, he said. She may sit. Denise's mouth twitched into a brittle smile. Of course. This is all just unnecessary. The room was long and narrow, lined with legal books and too many certificates. A fake wreath hung above a cabinet. A bowl of cinnamon sticks tried and failed to disguise the sterile air. Kyle and Brittany sat stiffly on one side of the polished oak table, eyes avoiding Clara's. Harold Quimby lingered in the far corner, face unreadable, hands folded like someone already bracing for an earthquake. Clara took a seat opposite Denise, placed the red-sealed envelope squarely on the table, and said nothing. Harrison adjusted his tie. "Let's begin." The official reading began with formalities. Harrison pulled a beige file from his leather briefcase, the version of the will Denise had clearly expected. A generous estate for her, a few set-asides for Kyle and Brittany, charitable contributions to be determined at a later date. Denise nodded along, confident. Kyle looked bored. Brittany scrolled her phone under the table. Then Clara slid the red-sealed envelope across the wood. "I'd like this entered into record." Harrison took it, brow furrowing. He broke the seal, unfolded the will, and began reading in silence. The air grew tighter with each passing second. He reached the final page, flipped it back, checked a notary stamp, then reread it again. When he looked up, his voice was measured but firmer. "This document supersedes the one we just read. It's notarized in full, dated 6 weeks before Mr. Jennings passed, and quite detailed." Denise leaned forward, detailed how Harrison cleared his throat. "It names Clara Jennings as sole executor of the estate. All primary assets, including real estate trust holdings and the family foundation, are to be transferred into a charitable fund in Samuel Jennings' name, with Clara as board chair. Mrs. Langford is allotted a monthly stipend to be reviewed annually." The silence snapped. "A stipend?" Denise's voice hitched. "Are you serious?" Kyle looked pale. Brittany stopped scrolling. "This can't be right," Denise continued. "Samuel wasn't in his right mind. He was sedated for half those weeks. There's no way the will includes a notarized physician's statement verifying his mental competence at the time of signing," Harrison said. Clara sat motionless. She didn't gloat. She didn't even glance at Denise. She let the truth stand like a monument. Denise's voice turned sharp. "You manipulated him. You fed him doubts while he was vulnerable." "Enough," Harrison said, firmer now. "The state of Pennsylvania recognizes this will. It was filed electronically and confirmed by the Office of Probate 2 days after signing. Notarized by Stephen L. Patel. Witnessed by Mildred Cohen and James Eddington, M.D. Clara remained still. A wind howled outside the window. Frost clung to the corners. The holiday garland above the cabinet trembled slightly in the draft, like even the plastic sensed the room's unraveling. Then it happened. Denise stood too fast, knocking over her glass. Water spilled across the table, soaking the edge of the first will. She didn't seem to notice. He was confused. She cried. He didn't know what he was doing. "This is a forgery!" A trick, Gregory Harrison dabbed at the water with his handkerchief. The signatures match 3 other legal filings from the same month. Denise turned to Harold. "Well," she demanded, "aren't you going to say something?" Harold shifted, adjusted his cuffs. For the first time in the meeting, he stepped forward. "The will Clara presented." He paused, cleared his throat. "It's been registered with the state for 6 months. It's legally binding." You could hear the carpet absorb the shock. Denise's mouth opened, but no sound came. Clara stood. She didn't offer final words, didn't deliver a speech. She gathered her coat, nodded politely to Harrison, and turned toward the door. As she passed Harold, she didn't stop, but her father's words echoed in her memory. "You have my name, Clara. They can't erase that unless you let them." She wouldn't let them. Outside, the wind bit at her cheeks, but the storm was finally blowing in the right direction. Snow drifted silently across the courthouse steps, settling in soft piles along the railing and dusting Clara's coat as she descended into the late afternoon light. Just ahead, Kyle Langford stood with his hands deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then he stepped forward. "You've made quite the impression," he said, voice low. "I didn't come to impress anyone," Clara replied. "Just to finish what my father started." He looked away, jaw tight. "Can we talk somewhere Not here. At Maple Bell Cafe, the same booth welcomed her like an old quilt. The garland above the counter sagged a bit more than before, and the cinnamon scent was softer but comforting. Grace greeted them with her usual gentle smile and poured their coffee without asking. Clara noticed her usual table had a new plaque on the wall above it, reserved Tuesdays, S.J. He sat right there every week, Grace murmured. Never missed it. Clara's throat caught for a moment. Kyle sipped his coffee, eyes restless. I found something, he said finally. In Mom's bathroom. Back of the top cabinet. A bag of old prescription bottles, labels peeled off, but they weren't hers. I think they were Dad's. Clara went still. Why are you telling me this? He stared into his mug. Because I'm starting to think she knew exactly what she was doing. And I'm not okay with that. She nodded. Quiet thanks, no theatrics. I know someone who can help. Teresa Mallory was not the kind of attorney who wasted time on pleasantries. She clicked her pen 3 times before speaking. We'll file a petition to review medical irregularities tied to Samuel Jennings' estate and death. The unlabeled medications matter, but I'll need sworn statements. And a toxicology request. Clara handed over the USB, the copy of the will and Kyle's notes. Teresa scanned quickly. This gets ugly from here. Clara nodded. It already is. By dusk, Clara visited Rose Haven Assisted Living. Mrs. McKinney, once their neighbor with a garden full of sunflowers and sharp opinions, now sat in a wheelchair by the window, hands frail, but eyes bright. I know that coat, she said as Clara entered. Clara smiled. You made me promise to keep wearing it until it fell apart. Mrs. McKinney's laugh was dry and warm. And you still bring soup. Even now, Clara knelt beside her. Always. You like tomato basil, right? The old woman's fingers trembled against hers. Don't let them make you small, dear. They always wanted to pretend you weren't there, but I remember. Tuesdays and Thursdays. You and that big pot of stew. Her voice faded, but Clara's heart swelled. Even as memories flickered, some truths stayed lit. The next day brought Claus. Denise filed an emergency injunction accusing Clara of emotional instability and coercion. A smear campaign emerged in neat, weaponized language, estranged daughter, erratic behavior, manipulative intentions. Signed by Harold Quimby himself. Clara stared at the court notice, then folded it into her bag. Outside, snow danced through town like music. Shop windows flickered with tiny lights. A boy tangled in holiday wiring outside a toy shop struggled with a knotted strand. Clara bent down and helped untwist it without a word. The boy grinned. Thanks, lady. You're welcome, elf in training, she replied. Behind her, the shop owner watched from the doorway. Sam would have liked that, he said. Liked what your way of making things better without fuss. She turned back toward the sidewalk, heart steadied. That evening, Clara returned to her motel. A simple wreath now hung on her door pine with one gold ribbon. She hadn't put it there. Maybe Mildred, maybe Grace, maybe someone else entirely. She stepped inside, shook the snow from her coat, and reached for the kettle. Then she saw it. An envelope on the floor. No stamp, no name. Slid under the door. She opened it. One sentence typed in bold font. Stay quiet, or you'll regret it. Her pulse throbbed. Her hands trembled, but not with fear. With clarity. She placed the note beside the others, then locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, the motel's porch lights buzzed softly in the cold. The next morning, she returned to Maple Bell Cafe. Grace brought her coffee and pie without a word. Clara tipped her double. She was reaching for her coat when the door opened, and Sheriff Marks entered, tall, gray, stubbled hat in hand. Miss Jennings? Clara turned slowly. Yes. He gave a tight nod. You might want to come with me. There's been a break-in at your father's office." The courtroom was silent except for the distant rattle of wind against tall windows. Outside, snow gathered in soft drifts atop the nativity scene on the courthouse lawn. Inside, under warm yellow lights and the scent of lemon polish, Clara Jennings prepared to speak words her father never could. She sat upright beside Teresa Mallory at the plaintiff's table. The worn wood paneling behind the judge's bench lent the room a sense of permanence, as if the very walls were listening. The gallery was full. Neighbors in wool coats, a few of Samuel's former business partners, whispering behind gloved hands, and a young local reporter scribbling notes with quiet fervor. Even Grace from the diner sat near the back, hands folded tightly in her lap. At the defense table, Denise Langford sat, rigid lips pressed into a pale line. Kyle sat beside her, head down, one hand gripping the edge of his chair. When the bailiff called the room to order, he didn't look up. Judge Whitley entered, his expression calm but sharp, a man used to cutting through fog. Teresa Mallory began without flourish. She laid out the timeline, the second will's filing date, the notary seal authenticated by the state of Pennsylvania, the medical records showing prescriptions that never aligned with Samuel's pharmacy history. A clear discrepancy. The USB audio was played aloud. "Clara, if anything happens to me, let them hear it in your voice. You were always the steady one." The room held its breath. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Then Kyle took the stand. His voice was unsteady at first, but he found footing. "She told Brittany and me, that everything was already settled, that Dad's estate would be under her control. That was before he even went into surgery." Teresa nodded. "Did she ever mention Clara's share?" Kyle hesitated. She said Clara hadn't earned it. "And your opinion now, I think Clara's the only one who didn't ask for anything." Denise's head snapped toward her son. "You ungrateful little," Judge Whitley raised a hand. "Mrs. Langford, contain yourself." Kyle stepped down in silence. Mrs. McKinney was wheeled to the stand next. Her voice was raspy but steady. "I may be old, but my memory hasn't packed up yet. That girl Clara came by twice a week with soup and bread. Never asked for a penny, just smiled and said her daddy taught her better." She looked directly at the judge. "I don't know what kind of world we live in if that's not worth something." Denise let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh. "This is absurd. These people are turning this into a charity parade." Teresa stayed seated. "Mrs. Langford, did you or did you not contest the will filed 6 months before Mr. Jennings's death?" Denise shot back. "He didn't know what he was doing. He was confused. You heard the audio. He sounded off." Teresa raised an eyebrow. "So your claim is that his voice was unfit to be recorded but valid enough to praise you in the earlier. Well, I was the one who took care of him. He trusted me." "Did he trust you enough to tell you where the second will was stored?" Denise faltered. I never looked. I didn't know there was one. That's what I'm saying. But you discussed inheritance with your children before his condition worsened." Denise's voice cracked. "I didn't think he'd change his mind." Teresa nodded. "Exactly." The judge tapped his pen once, then leaned back. "I find sufficient grounds to uphold the second will of Mr. Samuel Jennings dated November 3rd. The notary and witness records are in order. Furthermore, based on presented inconsistencies and testimony, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for formal investigation." He looked toward Clara. "The estate will pass into the hands of its rightful executor, Miss Jennings. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Clara exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. Teresa placed a firm hand on her shoulder but said nothing. Kyle rose slowly, picked up his mother's coat, then let it fall to the floor. Outside, snow drifted gently down, covering footprints on the courthouse steps. The reporter approached, young notebook in hand, tie slightly crooked. "Miss Jennings, do you have a comment for the Herald?" Clara paused, looking toward the sky where snowflakes dissolved into her lashes. She turned back with a soft smile. "My father's voice was heard today. That's all that matters." From the gallery steps, neighbors nodded as she passed. No one clapped, no one cheered. But in the way eyes met hers, in the silent affirmation of shared truth, Clara felt something settle, not victory, but peace. As she walked toward the waiting car, she caught sight of Mrs. McKinney being wheeled out. The old woman raised a hand. Clara raised hers in return. And beneath the snow, Lancaster exhaled as if justice had found its place again. Weeks later, the Jennings house no longer echoed with absence. Clara stepped through the front door just after dusk, snow dusting her boots. A gentle fire crackled in the hearth. Antique furniture, once removed or hidden, stood proudly in its rightful place. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner, its chime low, steady like breath. She carried a small candle in one hand and in the other a photo her parents on their wedding day. Her father's arm curled around her mother's waist, both of them laughing at something unseen. Clara set the photo on the mantel next to a bowl of pine cones and cinnamon sticks. She lit the candle, the flame dancing against glass and memory. For a moment the room stood still, and in her mind Samuel's voice returned. "Legacy isn't land or money. It's how people remember your kindness." The study still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Clara opened the window to let in the winter air, then began unpacking boxes. In the bottom drawer of her father's desk, beneath folders and spare keys, she found a leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with dates, names and notes in his looping script. Youth Art Initiative, needs sponsor. Fund for single parents returning to college. Annual soup drive. Don't let McKinney bake. Tell Clara why later. She laughed softly, then wiped her eyes. That afternoon she mailed 14 handwritten letters, each one folded neatly in cream paper, inked in her careful hand. To Grace, the waitress who never stopped smiling. To Mr. Abrams, who once tipped his cap and reminded her who she was. To Teresa, whose voice never shook. To Mrs. McKinney, now receiving regular deliveries of tomato basil soup again. She ended each letter the same way. "You helped me carry his voice. Thank you." The Jennings Foundation launched quietly, no red carpet, no spotlight, just folding chairs and paper cups of warm cider in the community center gymnasium. Children decorated sugar cookies at long tables. Handmade wreaths lined the windows. Beside the donation table stood jars filled not just with checks, but with slips of paper, volunteering 2 hours a week. 10 jars of homemade jam for food pantry. Knitted scarves in memory of Sam. Kyle arrived in a pressed sweater and gray scarf, holding 2 chairs for his sister and himself. Brittany remained quiet but helped hang garlands. Before she left, she placed something small in Clara's mailbox, a round ornament made of felt stitched with initials SJ. Kyle found Clara near the cider table. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "You were right. About her. About him." Clara nodded. "We all see things differently. Until we don't." At the podium, Clara wore her mother's wool scarf, soft blue, fringed with age. Her voice was steady as she spoke. "My father taught me that goodness isn't loud. It's found in the quiet things, a thank you note, a bowl of soup, a steady hand when no one's looking. That's the legacy we honor today. That's what this place stands for. And that's what we'll pass on." Applause rippled gently, not thunderous, but deep, affirming. Later that evening, as Clara stepped out into the snowy dusk, the carolers were finishing "O Holy Night" under the streetlight. She wrapped her scarf tighter, the sound tugging at a memory, her father standing on a rickety ladder, humming that very tune as he placed the star on their tree. She had worried he'd fall. He had winked. She smiled. Then a voice called behind her. "Ms. Jennings." She turned. A teenage girl with curly dark hair stood at the steps of the community center, clutching a worn mitten in one hand. "I'm Rachel. You helped my grandma once with groceries." She never forgot. "Neither did I." Clara stepped closer. "I was wondering." The girl continued, cheeks red with cold. "Can I help the foundation?" Somehow Clara felt something settle gently but surely in her chest. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you can." The snow fell softly around them, layering rooftops, cloaking cars, smoothing edges. In that quiet hush, something echoed not in marble or brass plaques, but in paper cups, soup pots, and stitched ornaments. What love leaves behind isn't noise. It's memory made visible through kindness. In the quiet return to her father's home, Clara didn't reclaim property, she rekindled memory. With each act of quiet kindness, she wove something deeper than justice, a community remembering itself. Sometimes the gentlest voices speak the loudest truths. When we stop judging by appearances, we start seeing what truly lasts: compassion that asks for nothing in return. So take a breath and look around. Maybe love is already waiting in a note, a neighbor, or a candle still glowing in the window.